you very much again for speaking with us, Claudia. Why don't we start by you telling us a little bit about yourself and your role in the Lehigh County Democratic Party?
Yes. So I joined the Democratic Party or the efforts with the Harris campaign. I was energized to come out and do some canvassing, some phone banking, and I just felt that I needed to do a lot more. So I stayed. I signed up as a PCP for my district, and I just kept getting involved. Some of our teams in the committee uh, um, gathered a bunch of us in Allentown to try and put out an effort to just have more presence in the Allentown community. So Allentown is 52% Latinos. Um, and I'm part of the District 22. And what started like a small idea, like let's go out there, let's be out in the community, to some of the events, some of the community events, just kept growing. The more that we just started connecting with organizations, with organizers of community events, the more that we talk to our community members, Latinos, and all other demographics are in Allentown. We just started finding spaces where we could be. So we started with, so one of the things that we have to remember, Allentown is a very lively community. So we have a lot of activities. During the summer, during the fall, during the spring, during the winter, even, there are a lot of activities where community comes. And one thing about Latinos is that we are very community oriented. And that comes from, our culture, whether it's folks that are growing up here or they have the influence from maybe their parents and grandparents that grew up in Latin America. We are used to that community, to knowing our officials, to knowing our neighbors, to celebrating together out in the parks in the city. So that's why the city is just so active. So we took advantage of the opportunity to be able to be in the community events and talk to our neighbors. So what it looked like was started off as just showing up to the park, and with clipboards of information for the judges, for example, because that was the effort in the summer, just educating folks and reminding folks about elections in November, talking to them about what we were trying to do in retaining the judges, and telling them a little bit more about who the judges were and where they could find information about them, because the important piece was not just to let them, ask them to vote for a specific candidate, but wanting them to learn about the candidate so they can make an informed decision. Um, and then that transpired into bigger events like trunk or treats and Hallow weekends. We have an event here called Hallow Weekends, which is Friday, Saturday, Sunday Halloween events. And at that time, we were able to capture a lot more, conversations where we were able to remind folks about elections coming up the next week. We were able to help people find their polling places. We were able to inform them of what all the candidates, who the candidates were that were going to be on the ballot, so that they can, finish getting informed about who these candidates were, what their agendas were, and again, they can make that decision about who they wanted to lean towards voting. And then just explaining, we had the item that we needed to let people know that the ballot was going to have the judge's question on the back of the ballot, so we needed to make sure that effort was out there. So that's what we've been doing in Allentown, and it feels like it's just not Allentown, but just in general, because PA7 is, it's about 20% Latinos, about 150,000 Latinos, right? So we still want to continue that effort, in the county as well. But particular here in Allentown, that's how we've been able to connect. And aside from doing the work, right? So we've been doing voter registration, we've been doing checking voter registration, helping folks switch their parties, update their registration, check their registration, and find their polling places. We've been able to just just be there. So at the events, again, they're community events. We're sharing, we're celebrating. We've also been able to just share those events with our community, just to be present, so they can see that we are actively in the community, providing information and listening to their concerns.
And the PCP is a precinct committee person or a precinct captain?
It's a precinct committee person, yes.
Okay. And
Mhm.
their job is to know folks in their area, understand their concerns, and also make sure that they are educated in um, upcoming elections, the candidates, and the issues, I would assume.
Yes. Right. And we do some canvassing in our own community, other PCPs, and I've been connecting a lot more with other PCPs, also Latinos, just to make sure that we are, this past week I was having conversations with a couple of folks, to connect and see what events or what not events like picturing it as a big thing, but just like a little block party. Set up a table where folks can get information, register to vote, ask questions about the candidates, ask questions about who's their representative. Sometimes folks don't know who they are. Sometimes folks don't know that there are coming elections. So, just letting them know when the elections are going to happen, why we're having that election, right? So we're having primaries. We're selecting our candidate for PA7 to run in November, or do we have a special election coming up? Or in November we're going to select our PA7 candidate. Or for the past election, we were going to have our mayor, our school boards, our commissioners, our Lehigh County executive. So just letting them know what is happening, keeping them informed, and providing resources. So where can they check their polling place? Where can they check for the ballot, a sample ballot? Or where can they find information about the candidates if they want to, so they can do more reading and educating on that end.
Claudia, um, a couple of questions. One is, um, what is your sense of shifting dynamics within the community? We know that in many, many places last year, the Hispanic community shifted to the right. More Hispanics, especially young men, supported Trump than it did in the previous elections. And then now I've forgotten what my second question was.
So I'll answer that first. I think what people are experiencing or what they've shared through our conversations is that mostly folks are just concerned. They're struggling. They are finding themselves with challenging circumstances, trying to afford their groceries, trying to afford their bills. They're finding themselves that the plans that they may have had, financially are not going to come to fruition because, now they have all of these different obstacles that are related to the rise of the cost of living. Other things that are concerning, of course, for our Latino community is immigration. It has shifted a lot of how people show up in the community, because a lot of them are scared to come out into the community. And this is not only just for folks that are immigrants, undocumented. These are also folks that are immigrant or of immigrant heritage that because they know that people are being profiled, that they may be at risk. Somebody like myself, who I walk in the supermarket with my husband, I speak Spanish. I'm having a full conversation with him in Spanish about our groceries, while I'm transitioning between both languages. So, if I am identified, I could be profiled too. My children can. So, people that are of immigrant descendancy and speaking Spanish or any other language, but we know with the last court hearing, or with the last court decision with Noam versus Vasquez Perdomo, that people are, ICE is allowed to profile, right? So people know that, and our Latino community are apprehensive to that. They're afraid to seek out services at school for their children, like SAP services, student services. And this is making people make certain decisions about how they're going to vote next time because they're looking for representation that will understand those fears, that will understand those hesitations, that will understand the challenges that they're facing.
When you hear those concerns, how do you relate those to what the Democratic Party has or could do for them?
Well, personally, I have, because I do follow the news, and I do keep track of, certain representatives that even if they don't represent my district or my state, what the Democratic, representatives as a whole, they are doing, I do see how some of them are coming out publicly and fighting for, for these rights and fighting to make sure that, our demographic is being represented and protected. Um, we know that the media is very skewed, so they show what they want to show to certain demographics, right? We have the Fox News versus your NBC versus your CNN, and every demographic of population watches or follows specific news outlets. Um, but people, I think that in that sense, not everybody knows what the representatives are doing for them, and one of the most important parts, and I always have this conversation with my husband, is about when I see a represent or a candidate, that is going for election. Be very clear about what the agenda is and what you're going to do to impact the people in the community. So it's not just talking points, but what do those talking points really mean for a person? Right. So if you tell me you're going to make life more affordable, if you're going to tell me how we're going to work on healthcare, okay. So in terms of affordability, does it mean that I will be able to pay my rent? Does it mean that I will be able to pay my car note? Does it mean that I will be able to put food on the table and also buy pizza on a Friday for my child and or ice cream, to be able to do all these things or afford Christmas presents, right? So those are the things that a candidate I think needs to be able to and we talk about from the Democratic side, just making sure that our candidates are very clear about what those talking points really translate in action to and in practice for our constituency because a lot of a lot of times people don't have the time to sit in front of the TV or on their phones to just constantly be you know taking in all of the news that comes in or to be able to break down and select which ones are important with the influx of news that we receive. So if we have very concise talking points and a breakdown of what the impact will be on the person, on the community, then that will be very helpful. And a lot of times that's what I find when I have conversations with people and in the community. I know this person, this candidate does XYZ, but what does it mean for me? Like how is he representing me? And I think that people need to know that.
Can you give any examples of some of those successful talking points?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have really good conversations. I can say that in all of the events that we've been to, we have not had any negative incidents. I mean, everybody we've approached has been very friendly. A lot of folks have been, people come up to us and just thanks us for being there. And I think that they wanted that. And I think that we're serving that purpose of just being present so they can see us and feel supported. Okay, the Democratic Committee is here. They are here. The candidates have shown up. So all of our events, we've had at least a minimum of one or two candidates just being there. Not even in most cases, not even talking about their agenda because the person was just grabbing candy, saying hi, and going by, right? But other times, the community members have stopped, met them, asked them questions, and I think that people were leaving happy with the fact that they were able to talk to a candidate or an official, right? And ask them questions about something that applied to them or that they wanted to know before they voted. So a lot of folks have stopped by to say thank you because we were there. And a lot of times too, when we've had conversations with people, they they were very friendly. And they just, we switched a couple of people. I was happy that and sometimes we had long conversations about what was coming up and what the process of election was, why we had the primaries, why we needed to be either a Democrat or independent or Republican registered, and what that purpose was. And I had a couple of folks say, okay, help me switch my party to Democrat. And we had a couple of people just register to vote because we had those conversations. So I think that in a way that was very positive.
There's been a lot of attention paid to the level of Latino support for Donald Trump in 2024. In 2025 and going into 2026, do you see that changing? And if so, how big a shift is it?
So I can't speak for specific data since we don't have that available, and I don't know what the numbers actually look like for the 2025 November elections. But in my experience with talking with a lot of folks, of Hispanic heritage, we had a lot of conversations about, for the most part, with everybody that I spoke to, like I said earlier, a lot of challenges. People are, facing a lot of challenges, affordability, immigration, and other areas. And I think that that's, persuading people to shift. Um, and we have a lot more work to do. I mean, this is all great. We've had a lot of positive outcomes. We have a lot of positive conversations. We know that we increase our voter participation in Allentown by a big number. And but it does not mean that we stop here. We have to keep going. We have to be present. We have to not just, for election, because that is one thing that one of the reasons that fired me up when, our group got together was that when I was doing canvassing for the Harris campaign, one of the things that I heard the most was that people will say that we only show up when it's election time, you know, and that really struck me. And I wanted to make sure that we are out in the community, like I said, not just to register people to vote, not just to tell them who to vote for, but just to be there as a resource, to remind people about when elections are coming, and to offer them information about who are all the candidates that are there and where they can find information about them. Talk to them because they're probably there at the event. And for me, most importantly, to do that in Spanish, right? So if I was able to have a couple of folks show up as volunteers, myself, and to be able to offer all of that information in Spanish where it's more accessible for folks in our community. I always remind people that it doesn't mean that some people don't speak English, right? So when we speak multiple languages, English may be our second, or maybe somebody's second language. A lot of times they feel more comfortable in their native language to have more in-depth conversations. So you might be able to have a medical conversation, a political conversation, or a business conversation, maybe just very on the surface with somebody whose English is the second language, right? But if we have that conversation in Spanish, right, fluently, we might be able to talk about more information, more topics, and go into depth about really tapping into all the important items that we need to tap into if we're speaking our native language. So that's why I think, like you say, for your Boston volunteers that speak Spanish, when you come here, having that conversation, it's like, think about when we speak our native language at home, with our parents, with our siblings. I have a whole different conversation and tone when I have a conversation in English than when I do in Spanish with my family. Or when when we get into these heated political conversations, we might be able to talk about so many other different topics than we would with a basic or surface level English. So I think that having that language availability, we will be able to have very conscientious and very significant conversations with the Hispanic community that would prefer to have these conversations in Spanish so that they can really take in what we're doing. In general, just young people, we do really need to focus on that social media outreach and really meeting young people where they are. And one of the recent, I took my son, who's a young voter now, and his friend to a candidate event, so that I told him, like, come and listen into what this candidate has to say. If there's another candidate event, I'll take them. So I brought them both. They're 18, 19, and then my daughter-in-law who's 20, 25. Come listen in. And one of the things that the young one said was that they don't see a lot of candidates reaching out through social media, and that's really where they live. And social media is where they get the information. They don't use Facebook. They're not necessarily watching TV. They're not reading the newspaper. They're getting their information from social media. And if we're not making that effort to put out the information through those mediums, we're not going to reach them. And like we said, earlier, a lot of the voters, the young voters, were, swaying to Trump, and we had a lot of the podcasters were, from that side of the aisle. So we didn't have that many podcasters. We didn't have that much social media activity going on the Democratic side. So we need to, I think, ramp up on that. And if we're talking about the Latino voters, and that mixed culture tone has to come through.